This is Wickett on Wisconsin. My name's Mike Wickett. After 10 years in Milwaukee talking sports, I took a bit of a break, but now I'm back and here to talk about the Packers, the Bucks, the Brewers, and more with you. And now inside the Koss Headphone Studios, this is Wickett on Wisconsin with me, Mike Wickett. Hey, we are back with another episode of Wickett on Wisconsin. Gonna get to give you an update on what is actually going on in my broadcast career coming up. If you haven't been paying attention to Facebook or Twitter or whatever, or you just listen to the podcast, I got something cool going on in my life, and I want to talk about it and give you the heads up on what is actually happening. But before we get to that, this podcast is going to be dedicated to Milwaukee Bucks fan. Now, Milwaukee Bucks fan, there's several different facets of Milwaukee Bucks fan as I record this on February 23rd. There is ultra panicky Bucks fan. There is, well, not so sure, but I'm going to keep holding out, I guess, Bucks fan. And there is also completely patient Bucks fan. And completely patient Bucks fan, panicky Bucks fan, you're the ones I want to talk to because you're the ones I see on Twitter the most. You're the ones that are the most vocal about the team. You're the ones that you definitely, we need to have some chats. So this one's for you, all right? You're Milwaukee Bucks right now, and I'm sure you're not thrilled with the record. The Bucks are 18-11 as we sit right now. Check that. 18-13, all right? If I would have told you after the last 2 years of having the best record in the NBA that after 31 games, the Bucks are going to have 18 wins and 13 losses, you probably would have said I was going to be crazy, especially after they acquired Drew Holiday and got rid of Eric Bledsoe. There is probably a good chance that you thought that this team was going to be just fine. And as we are learning, as we are watching, this team is not all just fine. You know what I mean? I can't help but look at this roster and think, man, they're missing something. And there have been all kinds of names that have been thrown out since the start of the season. There have been different names from guys like James Harden to P.J. Tucker to DeMarcus Cousins to Andre Drummond to all different kinds of names that somewhere along the line a Bucks fan thinks that guy can help. Victor Oladipo's name has been tossed around. There's all kinds of names out there for Bucks fans. When you watch this team, and I know that maybe it's a little unfair at this point to say, well, they're playing without Drew Holiday. Right now he's going through his recovery protocols in the NBA, and it's not quite the same, and they'll be fine. See, calm Bucks fan says, they're going to be fine once Drew Holiday gets back. I don't know, man. I watch this Bucks team like you do, and I see the offense get stagnant. I see guys standing around waiting for Giannis to do something. I see nobody really with the ability to create shots off the dribble, and I think to myself, this ain't it. This is not right. This is not going to get it done, especially with what the Nets have done over in Brooklyn by adding a guy that your boy Mike Wickett really wanted to see on the Bucks. If you remember, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but if you remember when word came out that James Harden put Milwaukee on his list of teams he would be traded to, and whether or not you believed that, because it might have been all smoke to try to get Harden to the Nets to force his way out to get where he wanted to be, and eventually he got there. But if it was true, I did an entire podcast about getting James Harden to the Bucks. Fear the Beard. It was a whole podcast, and it was something that got a lot of mixed reaction from people who liked it, who did not like it. The Bucks could really use a guy like James Harden at the shooting guard spot. Or if Victor Oladipo is a guy, the Bucks could definitely use him at the 2 spot, if that's a guy that's available. I'm not going to put this all on one guy, all right? Because there's a lot of blame to go around. There's a lot of different reasons why the Bucks aren't stellar on offense. There's a lot of reasons to believe that, they can improve. But I look at this team right now, and I think no matter, and you'll probably start your assessment this way, because I have. Well, Dante DiVincenzo's a nice guy. He's a good kid. Dante DiVincenzo is one of the worst starting point guards. Check that. One of the worst starting shooting guards in the NBA. Dante DiVincenzo is one of the worst starting shooting guards. Bottom 3 starting shooting guards in the NBA. The Bucks don't have anyone who can create off the dribble, who can get through a double team. Chris Middleton's not that guy. Giannis isn't that guy. They don't have a guy at the 2-guard spot who can create his own shot because they have Dante DiVincenzo, who has not taken that next step after being a first-round draft pick a couple of years ago. He has not gotten better to the point where you can feel good about that spot in the starting lineup. Everywhere else, you feel pretty good about it offensively. You feel good when Drew's in there. You feel good when Giannis is there and Chris and Brooke, and your starting 5 is fine. But man, oh man, when it comes to that shooting guard spot, boy, do the Milwaukee Bucks have a black hole. And I'm guessing tonight, after I put this podcast up, Bucks and T-Wolves, I think, play tonight. I'm guessing DiVincenzo has a career night because that's exactly what happens. Not that he listens to me or wants to spite me, but that's the reverse Wickett jinx right there. Every 5th or 6th game, DiVincenzo has one of those nights where you're like, there it is. That's the guy. That's the first-round pick. But then for the next 4 games, he scores a combined 18 points. And you're like, how in the world is this guy? And they lose all 4 of those games. And you're like, how in the world is this guy our starting shooting guard? That's where the Bucks have to make an improvement. I would argue also the Bucks could use some muscle, some beef down low. This team isn't exactly the toughest team in the NBA. This team isn't exactly the best defensive team in the NBA, although some statistics will tell you blah, 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 blah. You look at a guy like Andre Drummond, and I put this up on Twitter last week. I would love to see the Bucks make a move. Listen, whether it's Drummond or it was Harden or it's Oladipo or whatever, this Bucks team, this all-in year for the Bucks, where they traded away all these draft picks to bring in Drew Holiday, this all-in year, and they re-signed Giannis to the Supermax, this all-in year, this isn't going to be more than a second-round playoff berth, if they can even do that, because of the way this team has played so far this year. And we're midway through February. I mean, we're getting closer to, getting to March and into April. Are you seeing things getting dramatically better? I'm not seeing things get dramatically better. I don't want to do the same podcast about the Bucks that I have done, and that's why I'm specifically trying to talk and review in my head what I see from Bucks Twitter, because it's the same pattern for the Milwaukee Bucks. Everybody shoots threes from the outside. And you know what you have to do against Giannis. Now, Giannis has been playing out of his mind, and I believe in the last month he's been shooting 75% from the free throw line. Effing fantastic. That's all I wanted to see out of Giannis. But when Drew's not in there, and you have DiVincenzo, who has not, and I had high hopes for Dante. I really did. I thought DV3 was going to take that next step and was going to be like a 14, 15 point per game guy. Get you a dozen every night, maybe once in a while get you 25. That's what I expected out of DiVincenzo, and he has not lived up to that expectation. So I was way off on having these goals, these expectations for Dante DiVincenzo. It's upsetting. Defensively, they could use an Andre Drummond. They could use, it's not a traditional back-to-the-basket big man, especially not in Bud's office. I know he's not a guy who's going to step out on three or step out and shoot the three and spend all of his time outside on the perimeter like Brook Lopez. Now, Brook's a fine rebounder, and he's a decent defender. We all know that. But if you can get a guy like Andre Drummond, who's one of the best rebounders in the NBA, a guy who can average 17 and 13, and clean up the messes made by all of the threes shot and missed by the Milwaukee Bucks, that would go a long way. They're actually in the middle of the pack rebounding-wise. It's not like this is a statistic where they're, bottom 5 or anything along those lines. And I don't know how much that changes the entire system for Mike Budenholzer, which we'll get to him in a minute. But if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, how many times over the last 2 years when they have lost and you've seen the Bucks squad shoot from three and have a terrible three-point shooting night? Wouldn't it be nice to have the best rebounder in the NBA underneath the basket, cleaning up all of the mess. I don't want to see him with, 10-foot turnaround jumpers. I don't want to see that out of Andre Drummond. No. I would rather him be the guy that cleans everything up, a window washer, a guy who's going to get a ton of putbacks and clean up the messes by the Milwaukee Bucks. And now you're saying, well, Mike, what assets are they going to do? Or are they going to trade? Well, they don't have anything. You're right. You're absolutely right. The easy answer is always DV3, DJ Wilson, Brooke Lopez, right? Like, that's usually the easy answer. And a couple of twos, because they gave away all their first-round draft picks. Like, that's all gone now. You can't trade Pat Connaughton until March 3rd. I don't know if anybody would actually want Pat Connaughton. I sure would love to see Pat Connaughton gone. Personally, I think that was an absolutely dreadful contract, and I'm not 100% sure why the Bucks made that move. Of all the offseason moves the Bucks made, Portis looks like a definite win. Augustine, so-so, more positive than negative. Acquiring Drew Holiday, they gave up a ton, but they thought that was the missing piece. If this team could just be as good in the regular season, he would be better than Bledsoe in the postseason. Giannis in the Supermax, you got to keep your superstar, I guess. But of all these off-season moves, that Connaughton deal, I'll never understand why that deal was made by the Bucks. I do not know, but I digress. So I don't know what pieces they have actually to move to entice players, or teams, I should say, to move players. But it starts, and listen, you say, Mike, well, what if they get rid of Dante DiVincenzo? Who's going to start at the 2? I'd take my chances with Forbes and some of the other guys on there. I know that doesn't sound great, but I would take my chances there. I mean, how bad can Forbes be at the starting spot? DiVincenzo is one of the worst starting shooting guards in the NBA. At least I know Forbes is going to hit me a couple of threes every single night. I can't say that about Dante. I can't. Can't do it. And I want to talk about Mike Budenholzer here for a second. Coach Bud has had a tremendous coaching record when he was in Atlanta and now in Milwaukee. We know that. We know all the wins that he has been a part of as the head coach, the let it fly, this stupid, archaic, beatable defensive philosophy that the rest of the league has figured out, but for some reason, Bucks stick with it. I'm starting to get the feeling that either teams have completely figured Mike Budenholzer out. If it's not the talent on the roster, which all of a sudden, not to keep harping on the shooting guard position, but all of a sudden either the roster talent has dropped or isn't as good as we hoped it would be, and I think that's kind of an obvious answer. B, the league is figuring out Mike Budenholzer, which we all knew, and we saw it was glaring in the Miami series. It's been glaring all the time. It was glaring in the Orlando series in the bubble. If teams want to beat Milwaukee, just shoot from the outside. Milwaukee's packed the paint. They don't get out. Everybody knows this. Again, I've done that podcast 3 or 4 times. I don't want to do that again, all right? Or there's the other possibility. Is Budenholzer's message just gone? Is the team just not responding to Mike Budenholzer anymore the way they have been for most of the last 2 years? I think it's a definite possibility. I think it is an absolute possibility that these guys are seeing this, going through the system, running Bud stuff, and not seeing the results. And you can see it in the body language. You can easily see it in the Bucks' body language. They're frustrated, whether it's from the results, from the coaching, from running the stuff and not getting the results from the coaching that they have in the last 2 years, a combination of all of it. This ain't it, man. What's happening with the Bucks right now, this is not it. And I don't know if acquiring P.J. Tucker is going to get the job done, or when DeMarcus Cousins gets bought out and becomes a free agent, which might be the only way the Bucks can actually add pieces. Maybe DeMarcus Cousins, who wasn't getting all the starting run in Houston because of Christian Wood. That would have been nice, by the way, former Milwaukee Buck. But maybe Cousins is an answer. I mean, he's averaging, 9 and 5, something like that. I don't have his numbers here in front of me. Let me see if I can pull them up real quick. I had him. I was just looking at him For some reason, I was looking at DeMarcus Cousins' number. 9-7. He's only shooting 37% from the floor, which you would expect Cousins to be a little higher than that considering his position, but I digress. If that's a guy that would be interested in coming to Milwaukee after he gets bought out, released, cut, whatever, by the Houston Rockets, that's kind of the way the Bucks are going to have to acquire pieces because they don't have any first-round draft picks left because they gave them up for Drew Holiday. Drew's been fantastic. When he's been able to play, this COVID thing that he's dealing with, whatever, Drew's been fantastic. I don't know if he's worth all 3 first-round picks. Drew's worth all 3 first-round picks if the Bucks can get to an NBA Finals. Drew's not worth all 3 first-round picks if after next season he's gone, and this was their attempt at it, and they gave away a lot of the future, and they'll go back to, whatever the Bucks are pre-Bledsoe with only Giannis and maybe Chris. And I know there's a lot of talk about moving Chris Middleton. There's a lot of talk about keeping Chris Middleton. There's a lot of talk about Chris Middleton. And there's always talk about Chris Middleton, who is one of the top 15, top 10 two guards in the NBA. But you see his limitations. I mean, Chris is a good shooter, good jump shooter. Not a guy who can create off the dribble for you. And it's frustrating to see. It's so – I love watching Bucks Twitter during games and during win streaks and losing streaks and whatnot. And they lost – 5 in a row? That West Coast trip was a disaster. And then they come back and they beat the Kings. Now Bucks Twitter during that 5-game losing streak was doom and gloom, trade everybody, blah, 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 blah. They come back and beat the Kings, and everybody was like, hey, everything's good. And I'm thinking, what are you – they beat the Kings. That's not exactly beating LeBron and AD and the Lakers or the Clippers or the Nets or whatever. The Bucks have been able to so far prove that they can beat bad teams. The Bucks have not shown that they can beat good teams yet. Not this Bucks team. And again, is it fair to talk this way when Drew Holiday is hurt? I don't know if Drew fixes this. I can tell you what, it's going to take a lot more than just adding your veteran point guard back to the roster to fix all the deficiencies from the Bucks. Now, the ball will move better. You got a guy who can create his shot off the dribble in Drew Holiday, getting back there, but you still have so many questions at the two-guard spot. You still have all these questions defensively, and they're going to have to make a move if this team wants to contend with Brooklyn now. After a couple of weeks, some growing pains, Brooklyn looks to be maybe the best team in the NBA. If you want to know my thoughts on James Harden, you can go back and listen to an old podcast, an old Wickett on Wisconsin. Boy, he would look good. I don't know if it would have been enough to give up Wilson and DiVincenzo, whatever, the second-round picks. But, man, the Bucks need to do something at that two-guard spot. So, again, I like DV3 coming out of college. I loved what he did at Nova. And you could see him getting incrementally better over the first couple of years. But this year, you needed him to take a big step, and he just has not. And that has hamstrung the Milwaukee Bucks. I do want to move on real quick to something else. If you have been following me on Twitter or you have been a friend of mine on Facebook or whatever, the teams in Wisconsin are the teams I root for so passionately. Watching the Bucks and the Packers, and Lord, cannot wait for spring weather after this polar vortex to talk Brewer baseball. You know what I mean? And I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, and I actually have latched on doing a part-time show. It's a one-day-a-week show. And I just started talking with the general manager at the radio group here in Des Moines, and he said, hey, we're looking to get somebody to do updates, just kind of starting small on this ESPN radio station that we have, 1350 down here in Des Moines. And 1350 has never had any local programming, at least in terms of sports talk, as they've been ESPN for a while. They've just kind of carried what was Mike and Mike, and now it's Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubon, the ESPN lineup, Max Kellerman and whatnot. And so I start doing some updates during the afternoon drive program, and they also are aired over on the Big Rock station down the hall on Laser 103 down here. And so after that, we started talking about doing a show, and, I do a show now Fridays at 4 o'clock. It's just a 1-hour show. Hopefully, I'm hoping this grows. I mean, this is one of those things that when it's like when you started a new job or a new company or whatever, and you're in at the ground floor. That's precisely what this new radio gig is for me. It is starting over in the career, in the format that I absolutely love, but with a radio station that literally has zero budget for local programming. And so I'm like the first little bit on the station, which is an honor. It's so very, very cool, and I'm thrilled to be part of it. And hopefully, and I do believe this will happen, it'll grow into something more. So I do a show called Wickett's World. It's Fridays at 4. The station doesn't stream yet, but the show is always on the ESPN Des Moines Facebook page. I put it up on my Facebook page, so if you're a Facebook friend of mine, if not, make sure you like ESPN Des Moines on Facebook. Help me grow those numbers, too. That's another thing they're asking that we try to do is to just grow the social media reach. And I would love it if you would like ESPN Des Moines on Facebook. It would mean the world to me. And check out the show every Friday at 4, although we're starting to learn that we're going to get bumped for a few things. I'm sorry to tell you this, Brewers fans, but we are the Des Moines affiliate for the Chicago Cubs. So I'll be on after every Cubs game on those Fridays, those day games that happen at Wrigley Field. The show will be on right after it. But it is awesome because if you have followed my career, I've been very, very lucky to have the career that I had. When I started at the radio station in Ann Arbor, and then to Milwaukee, and then down in Kansas City, and then to be a stay-at-home father has been a real life change for me. But to get the opportunity to come back and talk sports on the radio, the old phrase, you don't know what you got till it's gone, and not having the ability to talk sports on the radio, I learned how much more fun sports talk was than at times news talk. I was down in Kansas City working for KMBZ, and it was a news talk station. I had a blast with my partner, Jamie. Learned a heck of a lot about that end of the radio broadcasting world. But there's some times when it's just not nearly as fun. You know what I mean? Like, we talk sports. I just did 20 minutes on the Bucks, and we could do 20 more. And you have probably great points to bring up, and I will one day figure out a way to include you, your voice and your face, perhaps, on the podcast. But we're all rooting for the same team. I think if you're listening to this podcast, odds are you're a Bucks fan, you're a Packers fan, you're a Brewers fan, and we're all kind of rooting for the same team. The difference when you're doing news talk, as I was in Kansas City, especially if you know my politics, I tend to lean one way. Kansas City is in an area that tends to lean a different way, and you're always dealing with politics and taking calls, and there's heavy-hitting topics, and there's nothing wrong with heavy-hitting topics. It's just not the toy department of radio, as Tom Looney has called sports talk radio. And so to have this opportunity to come back and do a little bit, even if it's just a taste, has meant the absolute world to me. Like, that 1 hour a week I get is one of my favorite hours of the entire week. And it's so cool to have that opportunity again. So I'm fortunate, I'm blessed, I'm lucky, and I do hope it grows into something even bigger. And that is the goal. That is the goal, and that's why we're at the ground floor. It's like when Bitcoin was $1. Remember that? I don't know if we're going to be worth $50,000 for every one of our shows, just like $50,000 for a Bitcoin, but you understand what I'm saying. But I'm going to keep doing these podcasts for you. It gives me an opportunity to talk about the teams that I care about the most, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Green Bay Packers, the Milwaukee Brewers. And we'll keep this rolling along. So I know if you did see that I was joining up with ESPN Des Moines here in Iowa, that you're like, oh, is he still going to do the Wickett On Wisconsin podcast? That's the plan for now. I mean, I've got no reason. They haven't told me I have to stop. This podcast is still going to be going on. Obviously, as the NBA season rolls towards the playoffs, there's going to be a lot of Bucks content. We're going to have a lot of Packers draft stuff. It'll be very interesting to see what the Packers free agency does look like. J.J. Watt, is he coming? Is he not? Aaron Rodgers, congrats on your engagement to Shailene Woodley. We all kind of knew about it, but we didn't know about it. Now everybody knows about it. All that kind of stuff. So I definitely will keep the podcast rolling as long as, I can. That's my pledge to you. So thank you for checking out the podcast. Don't forget, tell a Wisconsin sports fan about Wickett on Wisconsin. Until next time, as always, go Pack, go Bucks, and go Brewers. Thanks for listening to Wickett on Wisconsin. If you have any feedback or you want to reach out to the show, you can find me on Facebook, Mike Wickett Podcasts, or you can email MikeWickettPodcasts@gmail.com. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter @Mike Wickett. Thanks to Silverman Sound Studios for providing the music for today's show. And you can find us anywhere you find your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Until next week, thanks for listening to Wickett on Wisconsin.